Hello everybody, I'm going to cover a game that is from the Isle of Man 2019, and there's a lot of games, there's a lot of YouTubers that are covering games by the top players, but there's a lot more interesting games at the slightly lower section. I mean, it's all the same section, but with Aleksandr Lenderman and Brandon G. Clarke, this game really struck me. There's another one with I think Magsudlu. Don't hold me to how to pronounce those names, but there's just some amazing endgames that are going on, and I'm not really seeing that necessarily in the top games, which are great, of course, but they're not as educational. This game really struck me, and I didn't see anybody covering it, so I thought I'd make a video real quick here. This is E4, E6, and we have Aleksandr Lenderman, who's kind of a New York player, 2600, trying probably his hardest to break into 2700 and get to the top. But of course, he's an amazing player. And here I think Brandon G. Clarke is an international master, at least like 2400, I think. All right, so we see the classical, I think the classical variation Steinitz of the French. E5 just chases the knight back, and then black plays C5, trying to attack the base of the pawn chain. Let me turn these arrows off so they're not distracting. And I'm not going to cover every intricacy of this game, but I just want to show the overall trend. Knight develops, and we just get this standard development, and then white takes on C5. A little unstandard. Normally you don't want to release the tension like that, but I think he wanted to castle on the queen side and then start an attack, but actually it just helps black develop a little more. Develops the queen, and then castles. Now, Lenderman has kind of an interesting idea here, which is not necessarily sound based on the computer's evaluation, but it is sound based on his opponent's rating and complicating the position. So sometimes you really want to give away material against lower rated players in order to achieve a win, because with your superior tactical strength, normally it'll confuse your opponent and you'll end up with a win, even though objectively it might not be the best. But that's what we see here. So it's kind of a psychological idea, but I thought it was kind of cool to see how it played out against a 2400 player, because I know I wouldn't be able to do that here. All right, so we see B6. Instead of just taking the pawn back, which is the obvious idea objectively, Lenderman decides to go for a more complicated idea of opening the position and gaining the initiative and getting an attack. White correctly develops and attacks that knight on C6, and then we see knight to B4, obviously attacking this A2 square, but also opening himself up to something like C6, which would further complicate the position. Instead, in the game, we see A3, and then pawn takes. Now he's going to sacrifice a piece. Bishop takes, just to trade off. And then we see an interesting position after the knight goes back, and then rook from F to C1. Now it's black who has the initiative, and it's not really clear what white should do other than just try to defend, but he can very easily go wrong in these types of positions. So I think that's why Lenderman went for this very interesting line of sacking a piece, opening up the C file, and just trying to mate white's king. So white has to play knight to D4. Obviously he's trying to prevent this pawn advance. Of course, black would have to bring his queen in first, but it is a huge threat. And then we see queen to A2 anyway. Queen up, and now we see A5. Now, when I was looking at this game, I thought, why doesn't he just go here? But then I saw that black can play here, and the computer evaluation also suggested that either the bishop comes in or the pawn comes in, and with that two-move combination, it's pretty clear that black has the upper hand at this point. So he can't even try to trade queens, and it takes some steam out of black's attack. All right, so we do see A5, and then really the king just tries to run away. And the problem is that now black's won another pawn, and really these passed pawns over here could just easily decide the game as well. The king's trying to run away. And so Lenderman just follows that idea of pushing his passed pawns. And then we see a rather complicated queen exchange here. It's quite cool, actually. And there's really nothing else that black can do to keep his queens, so it is a trade here. So actually, you can see that all the pieces have been traded, the heavy pieces, and we're left with a rook and some minor pieces, and black is still a piece down, but technically he has these two passed pawns, which I would say is more than enough compensation. Objectively, it's roughly equal with a slight edge for black because of these two passed pawns. So again, we see a slightly complicated version of him trying to queen, and he allows his pawns, his connected passed pawns, to be disconnected and manages to keep pushing the pawns forward. Bishop comes in, and at this point with bishop to b2, black will win at least his piece back and he'll be a pawn ahead. So after all this complication, he'll be able to win his piece back. And it's just a pawn ahead, but in this type of endgame, with bishops of the same color, it's normally winning. So let's see how it proceeds here. Pawn up. Lenderman can take his time. He wants to get his king over, though. So he starts doing that. And then with d4, he has to be careful because he doesn't want to play king to c6. For example, if he plays king to c6, then he would lose to a simple fork here, dropping his passed pawn. So he just queens and then trades off, gets his king into play. And then I was wondering what happened if he would just take here, but actually it's the same position basically. So this evaluation in the position here is that black has an extra pawn, a passed pawn, and that really cramps white's style because no matter what happens at this point, whether the bishops trade, as long as black keeps his extra pawn, there's no way that white can get over and protect these pawns. And if he tries to do that, then black will just push the passed pawn. So at this point, he's lost. But it requires some technique, so let's see what happens here. Instead of taking, we just see f6, which is the correct decision. He wants to keep all of his pawns. When you are trying to keep the tension, you basically don't want to make trades. And we see that here. So king to a4. And it's a little difficult of how black can proceed because the king can't really get in yet. He can just shuffle his bishop. So we basically have to make some tactical trickery here, which we see with bishop to a3. Now it looks like bishop can just take, and then we can take here, but it's still going to cause some problems because black will have the initiative and he'll eventually be able to win this pawn. So from this position, it's rather tricky for black, but it's still technically dead lost for white. So he didn't go for that because after king to a4 here, then black can seize the initiative, and there's really no way that he can prevent black from taking all these pawns. So he didn't go for that. Of course, you need to understand these endgames in order to go for this line, but he tricked him into taking here, and now we see there's no way for black to defend this pawn. So he gets his pawn back, and we see some moves after the kings start coming over, and he's pushing this pawn to try to basically force the kings over. And white trades anyway. He's lost, but eventually they'll trade pawns and black will maintain his pawn edge. And we see after these moves, white can't come here because after this pawn forward or just pawn here tries to come around, black will eventually come around and just queen his pawn anyway. And then the game was over. Eventually, if white goes here, we just see here, all his pawns will fall, and it's a simple win. So a very interesting bishop endgame. I'm not covering everything in this game, but it was definitely just optically, it's a very cool game to see.